of San Quattro, which has a magnificent set of frescoes that were only discovered in 1996 and have been recently restored. And that image has a rat in it, so you can amuse yourselves trying to spot the rat. What I do then, I am going to talk about fairly recent discoveries and restorations. I'm very much leaning on the work of the art and architecture historian Julian Gardner, whose book is Rome and the Crucible, is a book which makes a very big argument that Rome was much more important in the 13th century in the arts than people had understood. So I'm leaning on Julian Gardner's work. This is not my specialty. So I do not do art history or archaeology. So some questions I won't be able to answer. But it's a great pleasure to talk about. I decided the thing to do to talk about some of the recent discoveries is to kind of take a walk through Rome. And what we're going to do is to follow the papal processional route from the Lateran Palace where the popes lived. There's the Lateran, all the way to St. Peter's in the Vatican. I just want to talk about some of the things we know about along the way, and then we'll go to Quattro Coronati and look at the paintings. So there's the Lateran. Back, I forget, that's I think 18th century. Of course, now it's surrounded with asphalt and so forth. But that's probably more like what it was like in the 13th century, and that is where the medieval popes lived. They did not live in St. Peter's. The processional route. This is a map of. This is actually a map of medieval Rome here with the churches, which you probably can't see very well. But I gave you a tourist map just to make this a little bit easier to follow. The Lateran is here. I'm sorry, here. And the procession would travel from the Lateran down through and across Rome to St. Peter's. And then, of course, return. And again, I think the tourist map makes it easier for you to see. There's the Lateran. Here's the Vatican. Go right through the center of the old city. That means, just for fun, they go past the oratory of Pope Joan. And I gave a talk to the associates a few years ago about Pope Joan. I just thought I'd remind you if you haven't been here. Pope Joan is a legendary character who's supposed to have been a woman who dressed as a man who was made Pope and then fell off her horse in a papal procession in front of the Church of San Clemente and gave birth in the street. And then the explanations of how she died vary from different texts, but that is that's the story of Pope Joan. I'll tell you, I was looking at this a year or two ago, and some people in the neighborhood came up and told me that's Pope Joan's oratory, so she's still a legend in that neighborhood. We know that story existed from the mid-12th century, although we have no texts until the mid-13th. And the reason we know that, here is the papal procession. This, by the way, is where the church we're going to Quattro Coronati is. Here is where the procession used to go this way. But about 1250, they started turning right, which meant they were avoiding the site of Joan's oratory. So presumably, the story was out. And then we just don't have text until about 1255. So we would go past that. The Pope then would, when he was becoming consecrated Pope, he would travel across the city all the way to St. Peter's. There's old St. Peter's as it looked before it was demolished. At St. Peter's, he would receive his papal tiara and his white horse, and then proceed back across town. Probably great following with him. We know something very interesting about Rome from the archaeologists. I've only learned a couple of months ago, and that is that if you've been there or seen pictures, you know that the ancient ruins are as much as 15 feet below the current ground level. And I had long thought that was because of the dust over time, alluvial stuff, and also accumulated trash. It turns out that's not true. It turns out the archaeologists have found a number of sites. So see, the numbers indicate where those sites are, and they're all along the processional route, where, in fact, in the early 12th century, what happened was that probably under papal pressure, the old ruins were demolished, fill was dumped in, they literally raised the level of the street and leveled it out. So that, at least in that area, that was done, it was a conscious construction project rather than just an accident of history. It also, by the way, improved the drainage in it. That's a low part of the city of Rome. And here is an image to give you a sense of just how much higher the ground level is. This is a large, when you talk about Argentina. I chose this slide because it's now a cat sanctuary. There's the kitty. And this is like maybe 12 feet. So the ground level is way higher than the Rome. And that was a part of this construction project. I want to turn then to another aspect of medieval Rome that you would have noticed had you walked this way. People who worked in the north in Italy in this period become fascinated with the many towers that existed in the towns. I mean, Siena, Florence, most of those towns, Bologna, where I work now, would have hundreds of towers, as high as 180 feet. And they're cut down at the end of the 13th century because they're a military threat. It turns out they existed in Rome as well. There were 41, they think, in the 12th century, and then 88 were added in the 13th century. So Rome also was a forest of towers, just that most of them are gone. And here's an image from the life of a fresco cycle of the life of St. Peter in the Sancta Sanctorum, which is a chapel very near the Lateran, which is part of that papal ceremonial, just to show you that he was, of course, crucified upside down in the tradition. But look at all the towers. So this was painted around 1285, and 1285, that's what they imagined the site to look like. So picture, again, a forest of towers, very different from the way that Rome looks today. Oh, I forgot to tell you, this is great. This, if you don't know this, Julius Caesar probably was assassinated right over here. That's the beginning of the entrance to the theater of Pompey, which is probably the site of his assassination. So here lies the death of Julius Caesar. Another thing that we have been learning over the last few decades about medieval Rome is that by the 13th century, it was a real center for scholarship. The popes about the mid-13th century established what was called a right of spoils, which means that if a cleric died at the papal curia, wherever it happened to be, the pope could take that person's stuff. And they took the books, they took the treasure. So they collect a library from, largely from fallen colleagues in the course of the 13th century. In 1295, the inventory of those books lists 443, which by medieval standards is a huge library. Even more importantly, 30 of them were Greek manuscripts. It's actually the largest collection of Greek manuscripts in Western Europe until the High Renaissance. It also became a center for scholarship. They created what was called a studium. We sometimes translate as university. And the popes collected scholars like John of Toledo, who was a medical scholar, Raymond of Peñaforte, who was a legal scholar, Campano of Navarra, who was a mathematician and astronomer. So it's a center for scholarship in this period. It also was a center for translation. William of Morbica, who translated, there's a manuscript of Archimedes he translated right in this period at the papal curia. It was also kind of a book culture, and that I think is important to what we're going to see when we look at Quattro Coronati. We know we have the wills of 34 cardinals from 13th century. 24 of them list a considerable number of books. So surprisingly, the curia really was a book culture and a highly educated culture. Let me then turn to the Baroni. In the late 12th, 13th century, and then further on, a circle of families they got their hands on the papal office, held the papal office, also held offices as things like cardinals and abbots, and practiced absolutely unscrupulous nepotism, collected a great deal of wealth, and tended to dominate the city. I'm going to talk about just one example of one of those families, and that is the family of the Conti di Segni, who come from a spot, Steve will know, just southern Lazio. Their Lothar of the Conti di Segni became Pope Innocent III, the very famous late 12th century Pope. He then rewarded his nephew, Stefano, a cardinal. He also gave his brother, older brother, Berardo, enough funds, probably from Curia, to build a really magnificent family tower right along that processional route. This is what it looks like now. The center of it is the tower as it would have been in the Middle Ages. It's about half the height that it was in the Middle Ages. It's now about 127 feet. It is thought to have been 200 feet, so it's a very high tower. It also was faced with travertine taken from spoils, so it must have been spectacular. It's perched on a hill right over the Forum, right along that same processional route. So it was very much overlooking and I think dominating the papal processions. Stefano Conti was given a cardinal's palace in the church of Santi Quattro Coronati, which is where I'm going. This is a church which is also right along that processional route. It was a church that was actually, Santi Quattro Coronati means 4 martyrs. It's named for 4 kind of obscure martyrs who died in Diocletian's persecution. In the 4th century, it became an aristocratic residence. Then we think by about 499, it became a fortified church as it is today. It's a titular church, which is why the cardinal had it. It is the church, by the way, that the Norman conqueror Robert Guiscard burned during his 1084 rescue of Pope Gregory VII, who had been chased by the Holy Roman Emperor, was hiding in the Pope's fortress in Castel San Angelo. Guiscard came to Rome with a large army and left them outside the gate, partly because they were largely Arab Muslim. It would not have been a wise thing to bring them into the city of Rome and sit. He was a vassal of the Pope, by the way, so he was obligated to do this. He then did a kind of surgical strike, got the Pope, took him across town. The tradition in the books for the chronicles and so forth for a very long time has been that he sacked the city, burned the city of Rome. There's no archaeological evidence that he did that anywhere but this church. But he did burn Quattro Coronati. And the reason for that is that it's close to the Lateran, the Papal Palace. And there was evidently, we know now from archaeology, a tunnel between the two. So he was trying to close off what could have been an avenue for an attack on the Lateran or a recapture of the Pope. So it had to be rebuilt after 1084, and then was made a cardinal's residence. It was given from the 16th century, by the way, it's been the convent of a group of Augustinian nuns who are enclosed and also run an orphanage. So it is today an enclosed convent. So in the period in which Stefano Conti lived at Quattro Coronati, political chaos because of the efforts of the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II to try to get the cardinals to cooperate with him. And for a long time, they wouldn't even elect a pope. And then what he wanted, he was rampaging some troops around the countryside in an effort to force the cardinals to be more compliant. He wanted the city of Rome, he wanted to ride in as emperor. In the period when the frescoes I'm going to show you were built, the Pope, Innocent IV, was actually hiding in Lyon and held a council there where he deposed Frederick, which obviously would be ineffective. Frederick is said to have opened up his chest of crowns and pulled on his head in irritation had been deposed. In any words, that church was rebuilt after, right in the mid-13th century. Stefano Conti then built a Gothic palace adjoining the convent. That's how it looks today. There's the front entrance of the Campanile. He built a very large Gothic palace. And here is an image that shows you with those arrows where the place we're going to, the Ala Gothica, is up at the top of the Torre Maggiore, the higher tower in the complex. He was actually, in part, running the city of Rome in this period in the absence of the Pope. So he was a very powerful man. When he built his palace there, he created this Aula Gotica, means Gothic hall. And what it was a great reception hall, probably used for legal tribunals and also perhaps meetings of course of the Curia. If you have ever taught Western Civ or looked at a Western Civ textbook, you're quite familiar with this image from the San Sylvester Chapel, which is just beneath and it's done close to the same time. It's an image of that showing the emperor constantly giving the entire Western Roman Empire to the Pope Sylvester. It's based on a document forged in the 9th century, but it's very famous. Again, that image shows, along with this one, which shows the emperor leading the Pope with his tiara and his white horse after his leading the horse after his coronation. So there's the very pro-papal fresco cycle below the Gothica, which is arguing for papal primacy based on the donation of Constantine, which was not actually proved to be a forgery until the High Renaissance, when Lorenzo Valla discovered that there were medieval words like feudal, and it could not have been dated from Constantine's era. Okay, let me then. Here is the hall itself. It was frescoed. Most of the fresco remains, although the lower part is not. They think it may well have been images of cloth hangings down below. This thing was painted right under Conti's patronage, almost certainly, and remained until sometime, they think, in the 1340s. So about a century later, it was plastered and stuccoed over. For that reason, it survived. It would not, I think, we would not have the kind of bright color you're going to see. Notice how it is a monumental hall, so I couldn't find a picture that really made that point. Notice the height of this door. It's also the first vaulted Gothic hall in the city of Rome. The frescoes represent secular knowledge. These are not religious frescoes, although there are religious images in there, but they are not. Here's a little bit more of a look at them. They represent aspects of personifications of the virtues and vices, which I'll show you, the months, the seasons of the year, the liberal arts, the zodiac, and constellations. The reason I think this is so fascinating is that the tradition in the scholarship until fairly recently was that Roman art was backward, that what they did was to copy and recopy early Christian paintings or Byzantine paintings because they thought that was more sacred. That's what sacred painting should look like, rather than display this kind of secular learning. The closest comparison to this is the crypt in the cathedral in the town of Anagni, which is nearby, which also shows secular knowledge, but it's quite a rarity. So let me let's see. Then again, there are very few residential murals of this type still in existence. Let me show you then what this is like. Here you see down below, these are images of the months. This is this is March. This is February. There's the slide of January, which I think I should go back to it for a minute. Anybody spot the rat?
Yes.
Great. Actually, it's on. I think it's going for the food. It's a joke, right? We put a rat in there. So January is represented by Janus. You can see the two faces, full frontal, looking at you. He's being fed. He's asking for wine and meat, and here are two young men who are serving it to him. So there's Janus with his supply of smoked meat up above and his cup of wine. It's famous for this. This, by the way, is February. Cutting down a tree. My son looked at this morning and he said, "Mom, what's the deal with the naked guy with the towel on?" And I spent a fair amount of time trying to find some discussion on it. And in fact, those spots in the images of the months have the same kind of image. I'll show you some more. And I found no description other than the decorative frame includes naked people with fabric. So there it is. Up above are the liberal arts. And again, the frame is, all of it is a very decorative frame, including the naked guy with the towel, which kind of holds the whole composition together. Here's one of my very favorite images from this. This is the month of March. You can see it kind of reflects the spinario in the Capelline museum as the Byzantine bronze image of a boy pulling a thorn out of his foot, which is very famous and often copied. Here is March with this one pulling a thorn out, and there's his a close-up of his face. Some scholars have suggested that it represents contrition. That is, it actually does represent something religious, which is that removing the guilt for sin because of the contrition that he shows. I don't know. Up above, another naked guy with a towel. I think it's a gorgeous. It's gorgeously painted. I think this. I love the trees too. They're kind of goofy looking Dr. Seuss trees. This is one of the liberal arts. Here's music. So up on the higher level, again surrounded with the decorative frame. I don't even know what this is called. Anybody know what that instrument we call? I'm sorry.
Some sort of organ.
Oh yeah, the bells. Yeah, and so she had bells and then and some kind of. The liberal arts, the liberal arts do get represented in French cathedrals in the 12th century, like Chartres as a representation of liberal arts. So this is not so surprising, but the rest of it I think is more a little more surprising. Let me mention also the art historian Marius Hawkness, who now teaches at Notre Dame, says he thinks this whole fresco cycle is a reflection of the new openness to secular learning at the papal court. That is, they're celebrating what in fact was at that time being celebrated at the court, secular knowledge. One reason that this is seen as significant is that the figures sometimes engage with each other. It's not like Byzantine painting. That is, you can see this, there are, I guess not quite so he's gazing at him and touching his head, I guess. They do engage in ways that are not typical of earlier medieval art. Okay, on to the virtues. The virtues are represented as monumental women dressed in chainmail and helmets. So there they are. This is irresistible because they have some figure who embodies their virtue perched on their shoulders, and then they're stomping with their feet on images of the comparable vice and someone guilty of that vice. But what's interesting is it's Francis and Dominic, so the founders of the Franciscan and Dominican orders, within just a few decades of their canonizations. They're very recently made sense in this period. So here we have holy, sacred, emulation of the sacred, what Dominic represents, and down below, let me try to get this right. The false emulation is here, and this one also says emulation vos non bene, which is essentially saying your emulation is not good. The representation of someone guilty of this is here, Simon Magus, and the person holding this is labeled perverse emulation. There's a lot of interest, by the way, in the handwriting, the way that the text is written. And obviously, you see fresco cycles were like the one in Siena from the mid-14th century, where everything is labeled, but those labels have probably changed over the centuries. This has not, because it's been covered. So this is really covered what's there. Over here, we have celestial love on this side, and then down below, this is down here, this is a reference to eating, drinking too much, and there actually are two children overeating. If anyone has a theory as to why they represent the virtues as women in chainmail, I would love to hear it. I'm fascinated. I just don't know. Again, there's a closer shot of Don. Charity. This is charity. So a figure representing charity is St. Peter. That's St. Peter, propped up on her shoulder. And then down below we have hatred, and we have, you can see that's a representation of the Emperor Nero. These figures tend to be historical figures, biblical characters. And the scroll says, if you love your neighbor, you are fulfilling the law. You're living up to the law. And this effectively says, if you do, it refers to what your failure if you do not, if you love yourself more than anyone else. The notion of hatred and here, one more virtue I couldn't resist. This, can anybody read it over here? Sobriety, exactly right. This is sobriety. And sobriety is represented with Daniel. perched on her shoulder. And then down below is, oh, I know, this is the unsober. This is Muhammad, believe it or not. It's labeled Muhammad. Bizarre idea that Muhammad somehow was not sober, but that's in fact what's labeled. At this section. Here you have there are lots of kind of images in this thing that are, this, for example, the sun and moon are represented. This is the moon up in the higher region. There she is with some, I don't know what the staff is about, but there she is. Also, there's an image I couldn't get a picture of Mithras killing a bull. There's also these acrobats up there. And I want to just make sure to say, if you're interested in visiting Quattro Coronati, I highly recommend it. It's currently closed because of the plague, but what the nuns have done is to allow people in on guided tours 2 days a month, which is a kind gesture on their part, because they are an enclosed community. So they do have tours. You can sign up, do it well in advance, and then you can either have the tour in English or in Italian. When I took it, the Italians got into a big argument about why Vasari didn't know about this and why this isn't, but wasn't important in the history, why it's not in the art history textbooks. The answer is it was painted over, but so we ended up, so I would recommend go to the English tour rather than the Italian, because you want to hear a big argument about Vasari. So thank you.